beneath the skin of the earth lies a silence older than language, deeper than memory. The stones remember what we cannot. A time when ice gripped the continents, when strange beasts walked beside our ancestors, and when fires lit the darkened caves whose walls still whisper with painted shadows. Yet within this silence, there are questions that refuse to rest. Could humanity's story stretch back further than the fossil record dares to admit? Are there chapters missing, erased not only by time, but by floods, quakes, and the turning of ages? In every ruin, in every forgotten myth, in every enigmatic tool buried beneath the soil, there lingers the possibility that what we call the beginning is not the beginning at all. It is here, on the threshold between what is known and what is concealed, that our journey begins. As we walk this path together, consider lending your voice to its continuation. By liking, sharing, and subscribing, you help ensure these stories are not swallowed by the same silence that hides so much of the past. Let us step forward into the forgotten corridors of time and allow curiosity to be our torch. The beginning of humanity's story is not written in ink nor inscribed on parchment. It is carved in stone and scattered across the cold bones of the earth. To find it, one must step into an age where survival was a daily negotiation, where the world itself seemed poised between desolation and possibility. The Pleistocene stretched vast across the horizon of time, an age of ice and hunger, where men and women moved like shadows against the backdrop of immense forces they could not control. It is there, among the frozen plains and trembling forests, that the first recognizable heartbeat of our species can be heard. Imagine walking across the tundra 12, perhaps 20,000 years ago. The ground crunches beneath your feet, a thin crust of frost over soil hardened by unyielding winters. Mammoth herds press across the horizon, great hulks of fur and ivory trudging together like ships on a white ocean. Their breath rises in mist that mingles with the low clouds, their footsteps leaving trenches in the snow that mark the paths of ancient migrations. Wolves follow at a distance, their eyes glinting in the dim light, patient and calculating. And behind them, at the very edge of survival, comes a small band of humans, their faces wrapped in hides, their spears tipped with sharpened stone, their every step a prayer that one of those giants might fall. For these people, survival was a fragile dance. They did not dominate their world. They clung to its edges, finding warmth in caves, nourishment in roots and marrow, and meaning in the rhythm of the hunt. Yet even in this precarious existence, a spark was kindling. Tools became extensions of the body, flint blades fractured by precise strikes, stone scrapers polished to smooth hides, needles carved from bone to stitch together clothing that held back the biting winds. These were not the marks of a creature stumbling blindly through nature. They were the signs of a mind reaching forward, shaping its environment with intention. The fire was their heart. In the flicker of flame, the world softened. Shadows turned into companions. Warmth spread across frozen nights, and light pushed back the fear that lurked in the darkness. But the fire was more than survival. It was symbol. Around it, language stirred. Words, gestures, and sounds became a shared code, a thread binding individuals into a tribe. In the glow of embers, humanity's first stories may have been spoken, not as tales of glory, but as warnings, teachings, and whispers of awe. The fire became a theater, a temple, and a memory keeper all at once. The landscape was both enemy and ally. Forests teemed with game, yet predators stalked the same paths. Rivers promised fish, yet their frozen skins could swallow the careless. Mountains stood immovable, their peaks lost in snow, their valleys filled with echoes of storms. To live here was to bend to the rhythm of nature, yet within this bending lay resilience. Each generation inherited not only tools and techniques, but something deeper, a way of seeing. They began to understand the sky, to note the migration of birds, the rising and setting of constellations. Time itself was measured by these silent teachers, the heavens offering patterns that guided movement and memory. Even in this age of raw necessity, traces of spirit emerge. Burial sites tell us that the dead were not abandoned like husks. Bodies were laid with care, sprinkled with red ochre, accompanied by tools or ornaments. These gestures reveal something immense, an awareness of absence, a reverence for continuity, a belief, however faint, that life did not end at the extinguishing of breath. In these burials, we glimpse the first murmurs of faith, of myth, of an imagination that stretched beyond immediate need. And yet, survival was never guaranteed. Volcanic ash fell from distant eruptions, blotting out skies and altering climates. Glaciers advanced and retreated, reshaping entire continents. The earth was in constant upheaval, and humans were forced to move with it, tracing rivers south, following the herds, seeking refuge in caves when storms turned savage. Each migration was a gamble, and many gambles ended in silence. For every line that continued, countless others ended, unmarked and unremembered. But those who endured carried more than flesh and bone. They carried memory, knowledge, and ingenuity. They discovered how to strike flint to spark flame, how to carve antler into harpoons, how to trap small animals with snares of twisted fiber. These discoveries passed from hand to hand, not only preserving life, but layering it with continuity. Humanity was not simply surviving, it was accumulating, adapting, and transforming. If we bend close to the archaeological record, we see these moments frozen in time. A spear point lodged in the rib of a long-dead bison. A hearth blackened with charcoal beneath layers of sediment. A child's footprint preserved in volcanic ash. Each artifact is a fragment of narrative, a silent witness to the struggles and triumphs of ancestors who could not have imagined the future their actions made possible. Yet even as we reconstruct their lives, a question lingers. How complete is the record we possess? How many stories are lost in the gaps where time was merciless, where floods carried away settlements, where caves collapsed, where entire bands vanished without leaving a trace? If our vision of early humanity is pieced together from scattered remnants, could the picture be far larger, far richer than we dare to assume? In the rhythm of stone against stone, in the hush of breath before the strike of a spear, in the gathering of bodies around fire, humanity began to define itself. These were not moments of grandeur, but of endurance. And within endurance lies a form of greatness that does not require monuments. It requires persistence, memory, and the courage to step once more into a world that offered no guarantees. To walk with them in imagination is to confront our own fragility. Strip away the layers of civilization, the cities and machines, the vast networks of trade and knowledge, and what remains is the same elemental equation: warmth, food, shelter, belonging. The first humans understood these as absolutes, not conveniences. And perhaps in this understanding lies a wisdom we have lost, that life is not owed but earned, not guaranteed but cherished. At the edge of every day, as darkness fell and wolves howled across the plains, our ancestors knew the thinness of the line that separated them from silence. They held their children close, pressed their backs against stone walls, and trusted the fire to hold the night at bay. Every dawn was a reprieve, every meal a triumph, every survival a story carried forward. It is here, in the ashes and stone, that humanity begins, not with cities or temples, but with the courage to endure and the imagination to dream. And as the ice recedes, as the world softens and rivers swell, those small bands of wanderers carry with them not only tools and traditions, but also the seed of something immense, the possibility of civilization. The chapter closes, yet the journey does not. For as the ice loosens its grip, as forests thicken and animals roam new lands, something stirs in the heart of humanity. Fires will become gatherings, gatherings will become villages, and villages will whisper of futures yet unseen. What began as survival will edge toward something more, toward meaning, memory, and the architecture of mystery. The fire was more than survival. It was the axis around which early humanity began to turn, a small circle of light holding back the immeasurable dark. To sit before flames on a frozen night was to feel, for the first time, that the world could be softened, reshaped, even tamed. The embers cast warmth into bodies, stiff with cold, and in their dance of light and shadow, something intangible was born. The recognition that together, around the fire, they were more than scattered individuals. They were a people. In the quiet beyond the circle of flame, wolves waited. The growl of predators was a reminder that without fire they were prey, brittle as bone. But inside the glow, fear receded. Here, meat could be roasted rather than torn raw. Here, skins could be hardened, tools strengthened, and wounds cauterized. But more profound than these utilities was the way fire gathered humans together. In its center burned a symbol that even the youngest child could recognize. A force that consumed and gave, destroyed and preserved, a paradox of life and death. Language found its first stage around these flames. The crackle and hiss of wood became rhythm, and words rose to meet it, hesitant at first, then confident. Gestures were translated into sounds, sounds into shared codes. The tribe became more than a cluster of bodies huddled for warmth. It became a network of voices, each carrying thought, memory, and dream. What began as calls and warnings transformed into story. The hunt was retold in detail, each spear thrust reenacted, each animal's fall remembered and repeated. In these retellings, the act itself gained permanence, living beyond the fleeting moment of success or failure. The fire was also the birthplace of ritual. Sparks rose into the sky, merging with constellations that had already begun to shape imagination. Someone, perhaps a hunter or shaman, would point to the heavens and speak of spirits carried upward with the smoke. The flames became a bridge between earth and sky, between the known and the unseen. A child asked why the logs glowed, and a story emerged, of gods who breathed fire into wood, of ancestors who watched from beyond. These were not idle inventions, but essential scaffolding, ways to give structure to the overwhelming unknown. And with ritual came memory. Charred bones left at the edge of a fire were not discarded. They were reminders of life taken and shared. Songs, simple chants at first, rose to commemorate hunts, storms, even deaths. In these chants lay continuity. A tribe scattered by migration could carry its past, not in stone or parchment, but in rhythm and flame. Each retelling was an anchor against the vast currents of change. If one listens closely to the echoes left in caves and ancient sites, one can almost hear the hum of these gatherings. The evidence is faint. A circle of blackened rock, fragments of ash pressed into soil, Yet these fragments speak of something immense. They tell of evenings when the world was paused, when survival gave way to reflection, and when humans glimpsed themselves as more than flesh struggling against cold. They saw themselves as storytellers, as memory keepers, as beings capable of giving meaning to the relentless tide of existence. The fire reshaped more than imagination. It reshaped the body. Cooked food released nutrients that raw flesh could not. Roots softened, grains cracked, meat tenderized. Stomachs grew stronger, brains larger. Digestion no longer devoured energy. Energy turned to thought. Around the fire, humanity was not only warming its hands, but rewiring its destiny. The circle of flame also altered the shape of time. By firelight, night was no longer only fear and stillness. It became hours of vision and dialogue, a second life within each day. The fire stretched the boundaries of waking thought, lengthening the day and deepening the mind. Shadows on the cave wall flickered like spirits, moving in rhythm with gestures and words. It is here, many believe, that imagination truly flourished. For in the dance of firelight, humans learned to see not only what was, but what might be. Consider how fragile these first fires must have been. A rainstorm, a gust of wind, a careless foot could extinguish them. To keep the flame alive was to carry continuity itself. Embers were preserved in bundles of bark, smoldering through migrations, tended as though they were children. Fire was not just a tool, it was a companion, fragile yet immortal, mortal yet divine. To lose it was catastrophe, to carry it was identity. In the telling of stories around these flames, something profound occurred, the weaving of individual lives into collective memory. A child might never have seen the mammoth fall, but in hearing the tale nightly, in seeing the gestures, in feeling the excitement ripple through the group, the child carried that memory as though it were their own. Through fire, knowledge leapt across generations. No longer did each life stand alone, relearning survival from the beginning. Knowledge became cumulative, layered, enduring. The fire circle was humanity's first classroom, its first temple, its first theater. Within its glow, imagination leapt from prey and predator to gods and demons. Fear took shape as myth, hope took form as prayer. Questions became stories, and stories in time became the foundation of culture. Archaeology offers glimpses of this transition. Charred remains of feasts, evidence of gatherings far larger than simple families, suggest that fire brought together multiple groups. These gatherings may have been the first festivals, the first alliances, the first steps toward societies greater than the sum of their parts. To gather around fire was to lay aside fear, if only for a moment, and to recognize kinship not only in blood, but in shared humanity. And yet, as always, the fire carried dual meaning. Its warmth and safety coexisted with its danger. Flames could spread, consuming huts and forests, turning survival into ruin. This duality was not lost on our ancestors. Fire was worshipped not only as giver, but feared as destroyer. To control it was mastery. To lose it was disaster. To revere it was necessity. In the quiet hours after stories had faded, when embers glowed low and voices softened, the fire offered something else: contemplation. A gaze fixed on flames is timeless, as true for us as it was for them. In its shifting dance lies reflection, the kind of silence in which humanity first heard the murmur of thought. Around those fires, long before the first written words, philosophy was born, not in grand pronouncements, but in small questions whispered into the night. We cannot know every story told, nor every ritual performed. But in the blackened stones and faint ashes left behind, we know this much: fire gathered them. It made them more than solitary hunters. It turned survival into communion, fear into memory, and memory into myth. And from this communion, something irreversible began. The tribe grew into the seed of society. The flicker of flames became the flicker of identity. To gather was to share was to remember, and to remember was to become human in a way no other creature had ever been. As the ice began to retreat, and the earth shifted into a new age, the fire's role only deepened. Villages would rise, but each one would still hold a hearth at its center. Temples would be built, and within them fire would burn as eternal flame. Even cities, long after the tundra had been forgotten, would glow with the memory of those first gatherings. The fire remains in us still. We kindle it not only in stoves and lamps, but in the glow of screens and the warmth of voices shared across distance. Its symbolism endures, its memory embedded in our deepest stories. For in the beginning, when the world was cold and uncertain, it was fire that held us together, teaching us to see not only ourselves, but one another. And yet, the story is only beginning. For in the glow of firelight, humans looked inward and outward at once. If fire had given them memory and story, caves would soon give them canvas and vision. Beyond the flames lay the darkness of stone corridors, where walls would become mirrors of imagination. From the hearth to the painted cave, humanity was poised to make its first true mark upon the world. Beyond the circle of firelight, where shadows stretched long into the night, and silence pressed in with its own kind of gravity, humans began to turn inward. If fire had gathered them, it was stone that offered permanence. Deep within the earth, hidden from storms and predators, there were places where walls themselves seemed to listen, waiting for touch. Into these hollows our ancestors descended, carrying torches, pigments, and a vision that transcended survival. What they left behind is among the most haunting legacies of prehistory: the painted caves. Step into such a place in your imagination. The air is damp and heavy with the smell of earth and smoke. Torches flicker, their flames throwing restless shadows that animate the walls. Figures step forward, hands stained with ochre, charcoal, and manganese. With deliberate motion, they trace forms onto stone. Bison charging with horns lowered, horses in mid-gallop, lions prowling with shoulders, taut, mammoths standing immense, their tusks curved like crescents of the moon. These are not idle doodles. They are invocations. To create such images in the depths of darkness, far removed from sunlight, was to step into another world. The caves became sanctuaries of the imagination, where reality blurred into myth and memory into dream. Scholars debate the purpose of these paintings. Were they records of hunts, depictions of daily life, or were they prayers, visual spells cast to ensure abundance, fertility, or protection? Perhaps they were visions, born of trance and ritual, echoing with shamanic journeys into worlds unseen. Whatever their purpose, one truth endures. These were the first true artworks, the first known attempts to capture more than survival, to inscribe meaning onto silence. The handprints are perhaps the most intimate. Pressed against walls and outlined in red or black, they speak across tens of thousands of years with startling immediacy. To look upon them is to recognize not only the shape of a human hand, but the intent behind it. I was here. I touched this wall. I leave myself within it. Some prints are small, belonging to children. Others are large and strong. Together they form a chorus of presence, a community that extends from then to now. They remind us that these people were not abstractions in textbooks, but living souls with desires, fears, and a hunger to endure beyond death. The animals dominate the walls, and their realism is astonishing. Muscles curve beneath painted hides, motion ripples through stretched limbs, eyes gleam with intensity. These were not crude sketches. They reveal observation, patience, and artistry of high order. Some figures are layered, as though painted in succession, perhaps marking generations of ritual. Others are placed where the natural bulges of stone give them shape, as if the cave itself held the forms within, and humans merely uncovered them. In these works, we sense a partnership between artist and earth, an acknowledgement that creation was a dialogue, not a conquest. There are symbols, too, abstract marks, dots, zigzags, lattices, whose meanings are lost. Were they calendars, counting days, or lunar cycles? Were they codes of a language we no longer understand? Or were they sacred patterns, the scaffolding of visions glimpsed in altered states of mind? Whatever their purpose, they show that thought had expanded beyond the immediate, reaching toward abstraction, order, and metaphor. What is perhaps most striking is the choice of place. These images were not painted near entrances, where daylight might reach. They were made deep within, in narrow passages, and hidden chambers that required effort and courage to access. The caves were transformed into liminal spaces, thresholds between the human and the divine. To enter them was not simply to seek shelter, it was to participate in ritual, to leave behind the ordinary world and step into the sacred. Each step into darkness was a descent into mystery, each painting a torch held against the abyss. And in this descent, we glimpse the emergence of faith. To paint a bison on a wall and believe that this act might influence the hunt is to accept that the world is not fixed, that unseen forces can be swayed, that imagination itself holds power. This is religion in its infancy, not yet codified, not yet formalized, but alive with wonder. It is also science in its infancy, an attempt to impose order, to test whether symbol might alter reality. Between art and ritual, between myth and experiment, humanity began to shape its worldview. The echoes of these painted caves reach us still. In the vaulted chambers of Lascaux, discovered in the 20th century, the walls are crowded with hundreds of figures, layered across time. In Chauvet, even older, lions and rhinos thunder across stone with power undiminished by 30,000 years. In Altamira, bison huddle beneath ceilings, painted with pigments so vivid they seem freshly drawn. Standing before them, one feels time collapse. The distance of millennia dissolves, and we find ourselves face to face with ancestors whose minds were not primitive but profound, whose visions were not fleeting but enduring. These caves remind us that humanity was never only about survival. Even in the harshest of ages, when cold pressed in and food was scarce, there was a hunger for expression, for beauty, for transcendence. To paint was to declare that life was more than struggle, that meaning could be shaped from stone and pigment. The painted caves are monuments not of power, but of vision, not of conquest, but of continuity. And yet, questions remain. Why did they stop? Many of these caves were sealed or abandoned. Did the rituals lose meaning? Did floods or collapses erase traditions? Or did humanity simply move on, carrying its art into new forms? Carvings, sculptures, symbols etched on bone and antler. Each cave stands as a mystery, not only for what it contains, but for what it omits, the silences between the images, the stories we will never know. But perhaps the greatest mystery is not why they stopped, but why they began. What force within humanity compelled the first hand to reach for pigment? the first torchbearer to enter darkness and trace lines upon stone? Was it survival's echo, the desire to control the uncontrollable? Was it grief, love, or awe? Or was it something deeper still, the awakening of imagination, the recognition that humans are not only creatures of the moment, but beings of memory and dream? The painted caves are not only relics of prehistory, they are mirrors. They reflect back at us the continuity of vision, the need to mark, to tell, to preserve. In their images, we see our own impulses to write, to paint, to record, to create. They are reminders that art is not luxury, but necessity, as vital to humanity as food and fire. As we step back from the walls, as the torchlight fades and darkness returns, we leave with more questions than answers. Yet perhaps that is their gift. For in mystery lies wonder, and in wonder lies the unbroken thread of curiosity that binds us to those who lived long before. The fire had given warmth and story. The caves had given vision and symbol. Together, they formed the first architecture of the human spirit. And as humanity emerged from the Ice Age, carrying with it these legacies of light and pigment, it was poised to build more than paintings, more than camps. It was poised to raise stones into monuments, to gather into villages, to shape landscapes themselves into memory. The first cities, half forgotten, half buried, awaited just beyond the horizon of time. The painted caves, with their echoes of animals and human hands, feel like sacred beginnings. Yet, as the ice loosened its grip and the world grew warmer, humanity stepped out from stone corridors and began shaping the open landscape. What emerged was no longer only memory painted in pigments or ritual performed in the dark. Across hills and valleys rose monuments of earth and stone, vast enough to outlast generations, complex enough to confound the very notion of what early people should have been capable of. They stand today as enigmas, weathered but unbroken, whispering of forgotten chapters that do not fit neatly into the story we thought we knew. The ruins speak first at Göbekli Tepe, a hill in modern Turkey where the earth kept secrets for 12,000 years. When archaeologists brushed aside the soil, they uncovered pillars taller than men, arranged in circles, their surfaces carved with foxes, vultures, serpents, and lions. These were no crude experiments. The stones were cut and set with precision, aligned with intention. Yet Göbekli Tepe predates pottery, predates agriculture, predates what textbooks once insisted was the very beginning of organized life. According to the story we were told, people of that age should have been scattered hunters, their energy spent entirely on survival. And yet, here is a temple, a place of gathering, a vision of community writ in stone. The mystery deepens when we ask why. Why raise such monoliths if food was scarce, if there were no farms to anchor settlement? Did people come from miles around, drawn by ritual, compelled by belief? Did the need for meaning precede the need for bread? If so, the birth of civilization may not have begun in the fields, but in the spirit, in the drive to shape symbols into permanence, to raise altars to memory and myth. The stones at Göbekli Tepe tilt our perspective, hinting at societies far more complex than once imagined, their organization born not from grain, but from vision. And Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Across Europe, across Asia, across the Americas, stones rise where they should not be. Dolmens, menhirs, circles of granite aligned with the sun's solstice and the moon's dance. These were not shelters. They were markers, calendars, observatories, places where the human gaze extended beyond the horizon into the sky itself. Stonehenge, though younger than Göbekli Tepe, echoes the same impulse. Its stones frame the sunrise on Midsummer's Day, its structure entwined with astronomy, its builders leaving behind no writing, only silence and precision. If villages of mud and reed crumbled back into soil without trace, then what is preserved in stone may not be anomalies, but fragments of a broader pattern. What if we have only stumbled upon the skeletal remains of a much larger story, its flesh long eroded by wind, flood, and time? Each megalith, each carved pillar, may be a remnant of societies that organized, flourished, and faded before agriculture spread, before the written word. If true, then humanity's march from forager to farmer to city dweller was not as straight as we once believed. It may have curved, circled, or even reset. The shadows of forgotten cities whisper most loudly from places drowned or buried. Off the coast of India, beneath the waters of the Gulf of Combat, sonar scans reveal structures stretching for miles, suggestive of streets and walls. In Japan's Yonaguni, terraces and steps cut into submerged rock hint at human hands, though debates rage whether they are natural formations or artifacts of lost builders. Off the shores of the Mediterranean, under layers of silt, lie ruins that suggest settlements drowned by floods long remembered in myth. Myths themselves carry the weight of memory. Every culture tells of destruction, of waters that rose and swept away, of lands swallowed and cities lost. The Sumerians spoke of Ziusudra, who survived a deluge sent by the gods. The Hebrews told of Noah, his ark carrying life above the flood. The Greeks imagined Atlantis, a city punished for pride and sunk into the sea. Across the Americas, Australia, and Asia, flood myths endure, retold generation after generation. Are these coincidences, independent inventions of fearful minds? Or are they echoes of true events, disasters etched so deeply into memory that they survived in story long after the cities themselves were gone? The earth remembers even when we forget. Around 12,000 years ago, as the Younger Dryas ended, ice sheets melted with sudden ferocity. Seas rose, rivers swelled, coastlines shifted. If settlements stood along those shores, they would have been swept away, their remnants hidden beneath waters. Could entire societies have been erased, leaving only hints in myth and anomaly? We cannot yet say. But the possibility presses at the edges of certainty, demanding that we question how much of history has been drowned. Within these questions lies something larger, the fragility of knowledge itself. Civilization, we assume, builds upon itself, each discovery layered upon the last. But if floods or quakes can erase, if centuries of silence can obscure, then perhaps civilization has risen more than once, each time carrying its own myths, its own temples, its own memory, only to fall back into shadow. What we call the beginning may be only the latest dawn, yet even in shadow, the human impulse endures. The stones stand, whether as temples, observatories, or markers of meaning. They tell us that humans sought permanence in a world of change. They were not content to drift with the seasons, to vanish into anonymity. They sought to root themselves in stone, to leave signs that they were here, that they believed, that they remembered. These were not the acts of wanderers. They were the acts of visionaries. The forgotten cities, the megaliths, the drowned ruins. Together they remind us that the line between history and prehistory is blurred. The boundary we draw is artificial, a convenience of textbooks. In truth, the human story is layered and incomplete, shaped as much by what is lost as by what is found. Each discovery tears a page from silence, but the book remains fragmentary, with chapters missing, erased, or buried. As the sun sets on Göbekli Tepe, its pillars casting long shadows across the Anatolian hills, one cannot help but feel the weight of unanswered questions. Who raised them? What rituals unfolded here? Why was it buried, intentionally, as though its builders wanted to seal it away? The site itself feels like a message, a puzzle left for us across 12 millennia, whispering, "You do not know the whole story." And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the shadows of forgotten cities are not meant to give answers, but to provoke awe, to remind us that the past is deeper than we imagine, that humanity is older in spirit than in record, that the seeds of civilization were planted long before the textbooks say they should have sprouted. These stones are invitations to humility, to curiosity, to the recognition that we are not the first to wonder, to build, to dream of permanence. From painted caves to carved pillars, from symbols in darkness to monuments under the sky, humanity has always sought to reach beyond survival. The forgotten cities may be shadows, but shadows are cast by substance. Something stood there once, something immense enough to echo still. And as we follow those echoes into the next chapter, the whispers grow louder, for myths of flood and ruin, of catastrophe and erasure, haunt the very foundations of our story. The stones of forgotten cities stand as enigmas, but it is water that whispers the loudest. Across cultures, continents, and centuries, stories of a great flood rise like waves against the shore of memory. They surface in Sumerian tablets, in biblical verses, in Greek dialogues, in Native American chants, in the songs of Aboriginal elders. It is as if the human mind carries an echo of catastrophe so vast that it could not be forgotten, only transfigured into myth. And when we turn to the record of the Earth itself, we find that the planet, too, remembers. Its scars carved into coastlines, its silence broken by drowned landscapes lying just beyond our reach. The end of the last ice age was not gentle. As the younger, Dryas gave way to warming. Vast ice sheets that had stretched across continents began to break and melt. Seas that had been held frozen for millennia suddenly surged, their waters rushing into oceans and rivers. In North America, the collapse of glacial Lake Agassiz unleashed torrents so immense they reshaped entire valleys, carving channels visible even today. In Europe and Asia, coastlines shifted, fertile plains vanished beneath rising seas, and islands were born from drowned mountains. For those who lived through it, the change must have seemed apocalyptic. Villages built near rivers would have been swept away overnight. Hunters returning to familiar hunting grounds would have found them submerged. Entire ways of life disappeared beneath the waves. Imagine standing on a shoreline 12,000 years ago, watching as the sea advances with a relentlessness that cannot be resisted. Day after day, the water creeps higher, claiming trees, fields, and paths once trodden by ancestors. To see the graves of the dead swallowed, to watch sacred sites vanish beneath water, would not be an event, but a trauma engraved upon memory. Such loss would demand explanation. The heavens must have opened, the gods must have been angered, the world must have been remade. Thus, myth was born from flood, story from catastrophe. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest written epic known, a flood is sent to cleanse the world, only for one man, Utnapishtim, to be spared, carrying life upon a vessel. Millennia later, the Hebrew story of Noah would echo the same themes: divine punishment, destruction, survival through a chosen remnant. Plato, drawing from Egyptian tales, spoke of Atlantis, a great island civilization drowned in a single day and night. Across the Americas, native peoples recount floods that reshaped the land, spirits that swallowed valleys, rivers that rose to consume. Even in the Pacific Islands, stories survive of waves that devoured shores and forced migrations. Skeptics argue these tales are coincidences, natural human attempts to explain local floods. But their ubiquity suggests otherwise. Could they be fragments of a shared memory, a collective scar passed down through generations? Oral traditions can endure for millennia, carried carefully, reshaped but not erased. If entire coastlines were redrawn, if floods swept away lives on a continental scale, it is not unthinkable that memory itself would carry the weight forward long after the waters had settled. Archaeology has begun to find hints beneath the seas. Off the coast of India, sonar has revealed patterns suggestive of structures now submerged under the Gulf of Kambat. In the Mediterranean, cities like Pavlopetri and Herakleion lay beneath silt until rediscovered, preserved by their watery tombs. In Japan's Yonaguni, terraces and steps cut into submerged stone invite debate over whether they are natural or human. Even if some formations are born of geology, others are unmistakably human. They remind us that seas have swallowed civilizations before and may have swallowed more than we yet know. The Black Sea carries one of the most debated clues. Around 7,000 years ago, as global seas rose, salt water may have surged through the Bosporus, flooding what had been a fertile freshwater basin. For those who lived there, it would have been the end of a world. The drowning of a homeland could well echo in stories carried into Sumer and beyond. Whether or not this was the origin of flood myths, it shows how abrupt, how violent, and how permanent the changes of that age could be. The floods were not only disasters, they were also catalysts. In the face of loss, people adapted. They moved inland, built higher, learned to anticipate the cycles of water. The river valleys of the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, these would become cradles of civilization, nourished by floods, but also haunted by memory of waters that destroyed. Perhaps it was this duality, water as giver and taker, that etched itself so deeply into mythology. Rivers became gods, seas became thresholds, floods became judgments. Humanity was learning not only to endure catastrophe, but to fold it into meaning. The scale of these floods invites speculation. Could entire societies have been erased? If coastal settlements were drowned, their remains now lie under hundreds of feet of water, hidden by silt and time. We may never know how many villages, towns, or proto-cities vanished, their names forgotten, their stories surviving only as fragments in myth. Yet the possibility lingers that civilization is older than we think, that what we call the first cities may be survivors, not pioneers, inheritors rather than originators. And if such societies did exist, what traces might remain? Perhaps the great stones of Göbekli Tepe and other megaliths are memorials, raised in response to loss, anchors against the impermanence of water. Perhaps myths of gods who punished humanity with flood are not metaphors at all, but distorted memories of real catastrophe. In this light, the flood myths are less fantasy than testimony, carried across generations until they hardened into story. The floods remind us of the fragility of memory itself. Water erases. It washes away not only soil and stone, but evidence, artifacts, entire chapters of history. What survives does so by accident, sealed in caves, buried in mud, preserved against the odds. The rest is gone, leaving us with riddles. To reconstruct the story of humanity is to piece together fragments from what the waters spared, always aware that the majority lies hidden beneath waves. And yet, there is something profoundly human in the persistence of flood stories. They reveal a refusal to let catastrophe be silence. To tell of destruction is to resist erasure, to carve meaning into loss. Each flood myth is an act of defiance against oblivion, a declaration that memory will endure even when land does not. Stand again at that ancient shoreline, watching waters rise. The sea is merciless, yet the people do not vanish. They retreat, they mourn, they remember, and they tell. And in the telling, they ensure that what was lost is never entirely gone. The floods may have erased cities, but they could not erase the human need to remember. As we move forward, we carry with us this haunting duality. That water both destroyed and inspired, that it gave birth to myth, even as it buried history. The floods that erased may also have been the floods that transformed, propelling humanity into new forms of resilience, new stories, new beginnings. And yet, after the waters receded, after rivers carved new paths and seas found new shores, the human impulse to build did not falter. If floods could erase, then stone could endure. Across continents, humanity began to raise monuments and mysteries not only as temples, but as defenses against forgetting. These monuments, pyramids, circles, monoliths, stand as humanity's answer to water's silence, as attempts to defy the erasure of time itself. When the waters receded and new coastlines hardened into permanence, humanity did not retreat into silence. Instead, it began to build as if in answer to the floods, as if stone itself might anchor memory against the erasures of time. From the Nile to the highlands of Britain, from the valleys of Mesopotamia to the jungles of Mesoamerica, people turned landscapes into monuments, shaping the earth into geometry, aligning stone with sky. These works were not shelters, not mere places to dwell. They were acts of defiance, inscriptions of vision, architectures of mystery. To stand before a pyramid, whether in Giza or Teotihuacan, is to feel the weight of intent pressing through millennia. These are not the accidental remains of survival. They are deliberate, precise, mathematical. Their stones number in the millions, cut and placed with coordination that required thousands of hands and minds unified by purpose. Their alignments speak to more than human ambition. They speak to the heavens. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, towering over the desert, aligns with cardinal points so exact that error seems unthinkable. Its shafts point toward stars that once marked the passage of epochs. At Teotihuacan, the Avenue of the Dead runs with cosmic precision, its pyramids echoing the pattern of Orion's belt. These were not accidents of architecture. They were statements, stone declarations that humanity was no longer only of earth, but also of sky. Yet long before the deserts birthed pyramids, stones had risen in other lands. In Britain, the great circle of Stonehenge was raised, its trilithons standing silent against solstice dawn. Though younger than Göbekli Tepe, it belongs to the same lineage of vision. Its builders moved stones weighing tons across miles of land, setting them upright in rings that frame the rising sun in June and the setting sun in December. To what end? Some say it was a calendar, marking the rhythm of agriculture. Others insist it was a temple of the dead, a portal to another realm. Whatever the answer, the effort alone testifies to a people whose gaze extended beyond hunger and shelter. In Malta, megalithic temples rise with walls thicker than castles, their interiors curved like wombs, their altars carved with spirals that seem to move even in stillness. On Easter Island, Moai statues stand with backs to the sea, their silent faces turned inland, guardians of memory. In the Bolivian Andes, at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, stones were cut with such precision that even modern tools would labor to achieve the same. Across the globe, across ages, the pattern repeats. Humanity raising stone in ways that provoke awe, defy explanation, and resist the erosion of time. Why? Why should scattered peoples, separated by oceans and continents, converge upon the same impulse to shape stone into meaning, to align it with sun and star, to carve symbols into permanence? Some argue for practicality, for agriculture demanding calendars, for societies demanding order. But these works speak of something more. They are not only functional, they are monumental. They carry with them the weight of the sacred, the urge to reach beyond necessity into vision. Perhaps they were built as bridges between earth and sky, as anchors for memory, as defenses against the silence of flood and death. Or perhaps they were inheritances, echoes of knowledge carried forward from forgotten societies erased by catastrophe. Could the builders of Stonehenge or the pyramids have remembered dimly the stories of waters that erased, the myths of worlds lost, and in response raised stones so large they could not be drowned, so heavy they could not be carried away? If so, each monument is both a creation and a remembrance, a declaration that what was lost once would not be lost again. The architects of mystery were also astronomers. Again and again, their monuments align with solstices, equinoxes, and star risings. In Egypt, temples frame the sun's light at specific days of the year. In Mesoamerica, pyramids at Chichen Itza cast shadows in the form of serpents during equinoxes, turning stone into theater. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across desert plains, their shapes visible only from the sky, their purpose debated. Ritual paths, astronomical calendars, or messages to the heavens. The pattern is undeniable. Humanity turned the earth itself into a canvas upon which the cosmos was mapped. To walk among these monuments is to feel both awe and unease. Awe at the ingenuity, at the scale, at the persistence of stone against centuries. Unease at the gaps in our knowledge. How, with tools of stone and copper, with ropes and wooden sledges, could such massive blocks be moved, lifted, and set with precision measured in millimeters? The explanations offered by archaeology, log rollers, sledges on sand, coordinated labor, are persuasive, but still the sense of impossibility lingers. It is not that they could not have done it, but that they did, and with such consistency across the globe that the achievement itself becomes a riddle. And so speculation arises. Were these works purely terrestrial, the product of ingenuity and persistence, or were they aided by knowledge now lost, knowledge carried from an earlier epoch erased by flood or fire? The myths themselves hint at teachers from the sky, at gods who bestowed wisdom, at culture bringers who arrived after catastrophe. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Oannes in Mesopotamia, Viracocha in the Andes, figures who emerge from sea or sky to guide humanity, then vanish. Are these simply metaphors, personifications of wisdom and order? Or are they echoes of something stranger, encounters whose memory blurred into myth? The truth may never be resolved, but what endures is the mystery itself, embodied in stone that refuses to crumble. These monuments invite us not only to marvel at what was built, but to reflect on why. They remind us that humanity has always sought permanence in a world defined by change. They remind us that the hunger for meaning is as old as hunger for food, that survival alone never defined us. We are the species that raises stones to the sky, that etches memory into earth, that refuses to accept silence. The architects of mystery were not building only for themselves. They were building for us. Each stone circle, each pyramid, Each monolith is a message across time. We were here, we believed, we dreamed. They did not know who would come after, but they knew someone would. And so they spoke in the only language that endures when words fail, the language of stone, of alignment, of scale. The floods may have erased cities, but the architects of mystery carved against oblivion. They shaped monuments that not only endured, but invited wonder across generations. To stand before them is to stand in dialogue with ancestors, to feel the persistence of human vision across thousands of years. And as we leave these stones behind, stepping from their shadows into the broader expanse of speculation, the horizon widens further. For if monuments were built to anchor against loss, myths whisper of something more, of visitors from beyond, of teachers not of this world, of mysteries that extend past stone into the realm of the cosmic. The stones stand silent, their weight pressing against centuries, their alignments pointing to skies that shift only across millennia. They endure not only as monuments, but as questions, and it is in those questions that myths find their voice. For alongside the temples and pyramids, alongside the circles of stone, and the lines carved into deserts, whispers have survived, whispers of beings who came from elsewhere. Whether from the sky, the sea, or the stars, these visitors of deep time haunt humanity's oldest stories, figures half remembered, half imagined, and wholly mysterious. To dismiss them outright is easy. Myths, we say, are inventions, metaphors wrapped in story. Yet when we find the same echoes across cultures far removed from one another, when tales of sky gods and bringers of knowledge repeat from Sumer to the Andes, from Egypt to Oceania, we cannot help but wonder, why this pattern? Why should human imagination converge again and again on the image of strangers who came from beyond? In Mesopotamia, the cradle of written history, there is the figure of Oannes, who emerged from the sea to teach humans language, law, and agriculture. By day, he walked among them, clad in scales like a fish, and by night he returned to the waters. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, descended to bring wisdom and the arts, a god who walked as a man yet belonged to the heavens. In the Andes, Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca, pale-skinned and bearded, to teach people architecture and order before vanishing again into the waters. In Polynesia, Tangaroa and other sea gods were credited with shaping lands and guiding migrations. These stories may be local, but their themes are startlingly universal. Teachers from beyond, givers of culture, mysterious departures. Were these tales purely symbolic, attempts to personify the sudden leaps of knowledge and culture that punctuated humanity's rise? Or do they hint at something more, encounters blurred by time into legend? Some researchers argue that such myths preserve dim memories of earlier, forgotten peoples, survivors of flood and collapse who wandered into less developed regions and were mistaken for gods. Others speculate more boldly, asking whether humanity once glimpsed visitors not of this earth, whether knowledge was seeded in ways we cannot yet fathom. Mainstream archaeology rejects such ideas, preferring to root culture's growth in slow accumulation. And yet, the myths endure. They linger like smoke from a long-quenched fire, stubborn, persistent, defiant of easy explanation. Even if purely symbolic, they tell us something essential, that humans felt knowledge came from beyond, that wisdom was a gift, that civilization itself seemed too immense to be only their own invention. The very persistence of these stories reveals a hunger for connection with forces larger than ourselves, forces capable of reshaping destiny. The sky itself fueled these imaginings. Night after night, our ancestors gazed upward into a dome littered with stars, each point of light a mystery, each motion of planets a puzzle. To see Orion's belt rise or Venus blaze bright before dawn was to encounter something both regular and inexplicable. The heavens seemed alive, orderly yet powerful, distant yet strangely intimate. Is it any wonder that people imagined beings descending from that vastness? The sky was the great stage upon which the dramas of myth unfolded, and from its expanse came stories of descent, of visitation, of teachers who walked briefly among mortals. Consider also the architecture aligned so precisely with stars, the pyramids of Giza mirroring Orion's belt, temples framing solstice sun, Nazca lines stretching toward horizons as though meant to be read from above. Were these alignments acts of devotion, ways of tethering earth to sky? Or were they invitations, messages inscribed upon the land for those who might return? Skepticism is prudent, but wonder persists. The monuments seem to speak across a gulf of silence, their geometry whispering of connections we do not yet grasp. And yet, the visitors of deep time need not be imagined as extraterrestrial. They may have been human all along, human, but from lost civilizations erased by catastrophe. Imagine survivors of a drowned coast, carrying with them skills of stone-cutting, astronomy, or agriculture, wandering into regions where such knowledge was unknown. To those they encountered, they would appear as gods, their tools and skills beyond comprehension. Their stories would be retold and magnified, their humanity forgotten, their memory transformed into myth. In this way, the visitors may have been echoes of ourselves, fragments of humanity's own forgotten chapters. Still, the possibility of otherworldly contact lingers, tantalizing, dangerous to certainty. Even if never literal, it reveals something about the human condition, the conviction that we are not alone, that wisdom comes from without as well as within, that we are part of a larger story. To imagine visitors is to imagine connection, to resist isolation in a universe too vast for comfort. Whether real or symbolic, these myths remind us that humanity has always reached beyond itself, seeking guidance from stars, seas, and dreams. The question that remains is why these myths endure with such power. Perhaps because they speak to the mystery of beginnings. Where did language come from? Where did agriculture, architecture, astronomy arise? To attribute them solely to slow trial and error may feel insufficient when faced with leaps like Göbekli Tepe, with its sudden vision of monumental architecture in an age of hunters. Myths supply an answer, one born of awe. Someone came, someone taught, someone left. It may not be truth in the literal sense, but it is truth in the sense of longing. And so we return to the monuments, those enduring testaments in stone. They stand not only as works of human hands, but as invitations to wonder. To walk among them is to feel the presence of something larger, whether divine, cosmic, or simply the weight of our own imagination. They whisper of visitors, of teachers, of moments when humanity felt touched by forces beyond itself. Whether those forces were gods, survivors, or stars themselves, we may never know. But the mystery is not diminished by uncertainty. It is deepened. The visitors of deep time may never be proven, but their shadows stretch across myth, art, and stone. They remind us that humanity's story is not only of earth and survival, but of sky and longing. We are creatures who look upward, who dream of voices descending, who weave connection into absence. And in that dreaming lies a truth, that we are shaped not only by what we know, but by what we hope, by what we imagine, by what we cannot forget. As the myths of visitors fade into silence, they leave us with a more unsettling possibility. If knowledge and civilization can appear suddenly, whether by gift, survival, or imagination, then perhaps the course of humanity is not linear. Perhaps it rises, falls, and rises again, each time carrying fragments of what came before, each time haunted by the sense of having been touched by something greater. And so the path of history bends not towards certainty, but towards cycles, resets, and echoes of forgotten ages. History, as we are taught, is a ladder. One rung follows another, each step leading upward toward progress, from hunter to farmer, from farmer to city builder, from city builder to scientist. Yet the earth tells a different story. It speaks not of ladders, but of cycles, of rise and collapse, of creation and erasure. Beneath our feet lie layers of soil, ash, and ruin, stacked like palimpsests, each one the remnants of worlds that came before. If humanity's story is truly linear, why does the earth whisper otherwise? What if civilization is not a single, unbroken ascent, but a pattern of resets, each cycle leaving only fragments for the next to puzzle over? Evidence of resets is written in catastrophe. Extinctions mark the fossil record like punctuation marks in a long, interrupted sentence. The impact that ended the reign of dinosaurs 65 million years ago is the most famous, but it is not unique. Earth has suffered repeated blows from comets and asteroids, each one erasing ecosystems, each one forcing life to begin again. Supervolcanoes, too, have scarred the timeline. The eruption of Toba in Indonesia 74,000 years ago may have darkened skies and chilled the globe, shrinking humanity's numbers to a precarious remnant. Floods, earthquakes, pandemics, all have the power to reset the page. But what if these resets were not only biological, but cultural? Imagine a society rising in some forgotten age, shaping tools and monuments, building settlements near coasts and rivers. Then imagine the sudden violence of the Younger Dryas, when glaciers collapsed and oceans surged. In a generation, everything could vanish. Villages swallowed, fields drowned, memory scattered. Survivors, clinging to life, would carry only fragments forward, fragments that, centuries later, might be remembered as myth, or painted as gods, or carved into stone as warnings. In this way, a reset would not simply destroy, but distort, leaving behind whispers without context, puzzles without solutions. We already see anomalies that tempt this interpretation. At Göbekli Tepe, as we have seen, monumental architecture appears far earlier than expected, suggesting that complex organization existed long before agriculture was established. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, stones are cut with precision so exact that their joins defy simple explanation. At sites across the globe, we find out-of-place artifacts, maps that depict ice-free Antarctica, beads carved from minerals found hundreds of miles from their source, astronomical alignments preserved in structures too old to fit neatly into the timeline. Each anomaly is debated, explained, contested. Yet taken together, they whisper of knowledge that seems out of sequence, as though inherited from earlier hands. Resets need not erase everything. Survivors endure. Skills, stories, fragments of memory persist like embers in ash. A child hearing tales of floods may not know the details, but the fear, the awe, the reverence survives. A hunter carving stone may not recall the full tradition of architecture, but a hint of proportion, a pattern of alignment, lingers in instinct. Across generations, fragments accrete. Civilization rises again, not wholly new, not wholly continuous, but something in between. a cycle of forgetting and remembering, of loss and rediscovery. Even myths may preserve memory of resets. In Hindu cosmology, time itself is cyclical. Yugas rise and fall. Ages of gold give way to ages of darkness, only to begin again. In Mesoamerican tradition, the world has ended and been remade multiple times, each era destroyed by flood, fire, or jaguar, each era born anew from sacrifice. Norse myth speaks of Ragnarok, a cataclysm of fire and ice, after which a renewed world emerges. These are not merely stories of doom. They are frameworks of recurrence, of resets, embedded into the structure of belief. Perhaps such myths arose not from imagination alone, but from memory, from the lived experience of ancestors who saw worlds end and begin again. To embrace the enigma of reset is to confront the fragility of what we call progress. We assume permanence, that our cities, our technologies, our records will endure. Yet a single catastrophe, a flood or impact, could erase libraries, topple skyscrapers, scatter archives. In 1,000 years, what would remain? Perhaps only stone monuments, perhaps only myths. Our own civilization could become the Atlantis of a future age, its memory debated, its reality doubted, its achievements reduced to speculation. This recognition is sobering, but it is also liberating. It reminds us that we are not the first to dream of permanence, nor will we be the last. It places us in continuity with those who came before, those whose works we puzzle over, those whose voices survive only in echoes. If resets are real, then we are both beneficiaries of forgotten cycles and stewards of memory for those who will come after. Science itself hints at cycles beyond human history. Geological records reveal not only extinctions, but rhythms, ice ages advancing and retreating, climates warming and cooling, magnetic poles flipping. The Earth breathes in patterns larger than human lifespans, patterns that can sweep away whole cultures. Even the stars impose cycles, the precession of equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, altering the sky's map over millennia. Ancient builders tracked such cycles, aligning stones with stars that would shift only across ages. Did they know somehow that resets were inevitable, that memory must be anchored in monuments vast enough to outlast time? We too live under the possibility of reset. Asteroids still cross Earth's path, volcanoes still brood beneath the crust, climates still shift with alarming speed. We are not immune. The difference is that we imagine ourselves prepared, with technology and foresight. Yet even now, fragility is clear. A storm can silence a city. A flood can erase a coastline. A pandemic can reshape societies in months. If catastrophe struck on a planetary scale, how much would endure? What fragments would remain for future archaeologists to discover, for future myths to preserve? The enigma of reset is not only a puzzle of the past, but a warning for the future. It reminds us that progress is not destiny, that memory is not guaranteed, that civilization is a fragile flame carried through storms. It challenges us to see our own age not as the pinnacle, but as one cycle among many, one chapter in a book whose earlier pages are blurred, whose later pages remain unwritten. And yet, there is wonder in this view. For if resets occur, if civilizations rise and fall, then humanity is not defined by loss, but by persistence. Again and again, we return. Again and again, we dream, build, create, and seek meaning. We are not only survivors, but renewers, carriers of embers that flare anew with each dawn. Perhaps this is the deepest truth, that while catastrophe can erase, it cannot extinguish the human impulse to begin again. As we move forward, we leave behind the enigma of reset not with answers, but with perspective. The cycles remind us of humility, of fragility, but also of resilience. And as our gaze lifts once more from the ruins and the myths toward the sky, we begin to ask larger questions still. If resets shape Earth, might they also shape the cosmos? If civilizations rise and fall here, might they rise and fall elsewhere? In the silence between stars, might we find reflections of our own story, echoes of cycles far older, far grander than we can yet imagine? When we lift our eyes from the soil and ruins of Earth, from the drowned valleys and the megaliths pointing skyward, we meet a silence vast enough to swallow thought itself. The night sky spreads above us as it did for our ancestors, each star burning with cold fire, each constellation a story strung across the void. Yet if the monuments of Earth are mirrors of memory, might the heavens also be a mirror, reflecting not only what we imagine, but what we are? The cosmic mirror does not return answers easily. It returns questions, multiplied by distance, shadowed by silence. For as long as humans have gazed upward, they have wondered if we are alone. The very word cosmos carries with it an echo of order, of meaning beyond the immediate. And the question persists. If life arose here, among the rivers and forests of Earth, why not elsewhere? Are we singular, a miracle enclosed within fragile boundaries, or are we part of a greater pattern, one among countless expressions of the universe's imagination? The mirror of the stars suggests abundance. There are hundreds of billions of suns in our galaxy alone, and beyond them, hundreds of billions of galaxies. Around many of these stars orbit planets, some rocky, some vast, some warm enough for liquid water, some bathed in endless light or shrouded in eternal night. The mathematics alone invite certainty. We cannot be unique. Life, it seems, should be scattered like seeds across the cosmos, germinating wherever conditions allow. And yet, when we listen for voices, we hear none. This silence is its own kind of mystery, the paradox that life should be everywhere, but reveals itself nowhere. Perhaps the silence is an illusion. Perhaps civilizations rise and fall in cycles, their signals brief sparks drowned in cosmic time. If resets occur on Earth, why not elsewhere? A planet may give birth to intelligence, to architecture, to voices that reach into the sky, only to be silenced by flood, fire, or impact. Millions of years later, another cycle may begin, but the stars do not keep record. Across the abyss, we would see only absence, not the memory of what once was. The universe may be alive with cycles of creation and erasure, civilizations flaring and fading in rhythms we cannot perceive. This possibility reframes the monuments of Earth. Perhaps the pyramids and megaliths are not only human achievements but universal archetypes, echoes of a pattern that repeats across worlds. Wherever beings rise to self-awareness, they may build in stone, align with stars, seek permanence against the inevitability of reset. If so, then our own mysteries are mirrors of mysteries elsewhere, our myths reflections of stories retold on distant planets beneath alien skies. The cosmic mirror, then, reveals not aliens as strangers, but as kin, beings bound to the same cycle of creation, loss, and wonder. And yet, the silence deepens the question. If civilizations rise, why do they not endure? Why no endless empires stretching across galaxies, no voices echoing forever? Perhaps because fragility is universal. Perhaps because intelligence carries with it not only creation, but destruction. Tools that can feed or kill, energy that can warm or burn, ambition that can build or collapse. Civilizations may be doomed not by nature alone, but by their own brilliance, their own hubris. The same flame that lights the darkness can consume its bearer. If so, then the silence of the stars is not absence, but warning, a reflection of our own precarious path. Still, the human impulse is to seek. We send probes beyond the solar system, carrying plaques and records etched with our likeness, our language, our music. We beam radio signals into the abyss, hoping someone, somewhere, listens. We map the atmospheres of distant worlds, searching for the faint fingerprints of life in light years of darkness. These acts are not only science, they are rituals, acts of faith. They are humanity reaching toward the mirror, asking it to speak, to show us that we are not alone. Even if no answer comes, the act itself defines us. To seek is to declare that we are more than survival, more than memory. It is to say that we belong not only to Earth, but to the cosmos. And in this seeking, we find reflection, that our questions are not only about others, but about ourselves. What does it mean to be human in a universe of silence? What is our place if we are alone, and what is our place if we are not? The cosmic mirror does not settle the question. It leaves us with dual images, one of solitude, one of kinship. In solitude, we are rare, fragile, precious beyond measure, the only known bearers of consciousness in a void. In kinship, we are one thread in a tapestry vast beyond imagination, part of a cycle of civilizations stretching across light years. Both images inspire awe, both inspire humility, both demand responsibility. And perhaps the truth lies in both. Perhaps we are alone for now, but not forever. Perhaps civilizations are separated not by distance, but by time, their cycles rising and falling across billions of years. We may be among the first, or we may be among the last. In either case, our actions matter, for they become part of the mirror that future eyes, human or otherwise, will behold. Look again at the night sky. Each star may hold worlds unseen. Each world may carry stories unimagined. We may never touch them, never know them, never share words or music across the abyss. But to imagine them is itself a form of communion. In our wonder, we are already connected. The cosmic mirror reflects not certainty, but longing, not knowledge, but imagination. And in that longing, we find the essence of humanity. As the chapter closes, the silence of the cosmos remains unbroken, yet its questions grow louder. The stars are not mute. They speak in light, in gravity, in silence itself. They remind us that our story is not finished, that our cycles may yet unfold into futures we cannot foresee. And as we turn from the mirror toward the closing of our journey, we carry with us the greatest mystery of all. What remains when all else is erased? What silence holds when memory fades? What echoes endure in the depths of time? The journey ends where it began, in silence. Not the silence of ignorance, nor the silence of indifference, but the deep, resonant silence of time itself. The earth has carried civilizations upon its back, has witnessed their rise and collapse, has folded their ruins into soil, their memories into myth, their voices into wind. Above it, the stars continue their slow procession, vast and indifferent, and beneath it, the stone layers accumulate with patient gravity. Against this backdrop, humanity's story feels both immeasurably small and immeasurably precious. What remains, when all else is erased, is silence, and within it, echoes that never fully die. We walk through landscapes layered with loss. Beneath forests lie forgotten settlements. Beneath seas lie coastlines once alive with fire and song. Beneath deserts lie bones of creatures that once ruled unchallenged, now dust. Each layer is a chapter of a book half burned, half buried, yet still legible in fragments. We are archaeologists not only of Earth, but of absence, piecing together lives from ashes, drawing meaning from what the silence allows us to find. And even as we reconstruct, we recognize that much has been lost forever, carried away by water, by fire, by time. That loss is not defeat. It is reminder. For silence is not emptiness. It is the canvas upon which memory is drawn, the field upon which echoes linger. When we stand before the painted caves, we hear voices whispering through pigment and shadow. When we touch the stones of Göbekli Tepe or Stonehenge, we feel the vibration of hands long gone. When we read myths of floods, of visitors, of resets, we recognize the persistence of human longing across centuries. Each fragment is a defiance of silence, a refusal to vanish without trace. And yet, silence has its own power. It humbles us, reminding us that the earth is greater than our records, that the cosmos is larger than our imagination. The silence of the fossil record shows us gaps we cannot fill. The silence of the stars reveals questions we cannot answer. We are surrounded by mystery not because the universe is empty, but because our vision is finite. In this finitude lies wonder. Silence is not the end of meaning, but the beginning of awe. The silence also calls us to responsibility. If civilizations rise and fall, if resets occur, then our age too is fragile. Our monuments may stand for millennia, or they may crumble in centuries. Our records may endure in digital archives, or they may vanish in a single catastrophe. We are not exempt from the cycles that shaped those before us. The silence that claimed them waits patiently, impartial, ready to claim us too. And so, the question becomes, what will we leave? What echoes will carry forward when our voices fade? Perhaps the answer lies not in monuments of stone, but in the same impulse that painted caves and lit fires, the impulse to tell, to share, to connect. Our survival has never been only about endurance of body, but endurance of story. We live in continuity with those who came before, and those who will come after will live in continuity with us, even if our names are forgotten. To exist is to join a chain of memory stretching across time, fragile yet unbroken. And perhaps, too, silence is not enemy, but companion. Around ancient fires, silence was as sacred as speech, the space in which stories settled, the rhythm in which thought was born. In caves, silence amplified the images, made them tremble with unseen power. In temples, silence framed ritual, giving weight to gesture and song. Even in the cosmic mirror, silence is not absence but invitation, a reminder that mystery endures, that awe requires space to breathe. To embrace the silence that remains is to accept that not every question can be answered, not every mystery resolved. Some fragments will always be missing, some voices forever lost. But that incompleteness does not diminish the story. It deepens it. For what is forgotten shapes us as much as what is remembered, and what is unknown inspires as much as what is known. Silence is the dark soil in which imagination grows, the unseen horizon that keeps us searching. And so we close with humility, with gratitude, with wonder. Humanity is a fragile species, yet one that dreams beyond its fragility. We build fires against the night, paint visions on stone, raise monuments to the sky, tell myths of gods and visitors, imagine cycles of creation and loss. We look into silence and fill it with meaning, not because silence demands it, but because we cannot help ourselves. It is who we are. When the last city crumbles, when the last library fades, when the last voice falls quiet, the earth will continue. The stars will burn, the seas will rise and fall, the silence will endure. Yet even then, echoes of humanity will remain. in stone aligned with the sun, in myths carried forward in ways we cannot predict, perhaps even in signals drifting through space, faint but persistent, waiting to be found. Silence may claim the world, but it cannot claim the fact that we were here, that we dreamed, that we wondered. The silence that remains is not a void, but a mirror, reflecting our fragility, our resilience, our imagination. To face it is to face ourselves, to recognize that we are temporary yet luminous, finite yet filled with longing. And as long as we listen, as long as we seek, as long as we tell, the silence will never be absolute. It will always carry within it the faintest echo of fire, of voice, of life. This, then, is humanity's inheritance. Not certainty, not permanence, but the courage to create meaning in the midst of silence, to paint on walls that will one day crumble, to speak into darkness that may never answer. The silence remains, but so too does the echo. And in that echo lies the essence of what it means to be human.